All right, good morning, everyone. We are a little light here this morning. I was kind of expecting that with people still recovering from being sick. But we know we do have several people who text me that they're watching online. So you have a captive audience online as well. So hopefully some more people will show up in person as well. But this is Lowrie Robertson, and he's going to introduce his family in just a moment. Lowrie's our new missionary and her family we've taken on this past January as they're going to go to Kenya. They're not there yet. They're preparing to go, and he's going to tell you all about that. He's also related to us. He is Lori's second cousin, something like that. Twice removed, I don't know. He's Lori's mother's great nephew. So that's the best way to put it. Jan's great nephew. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Lowrie, and he's going to give you his presentation. We'll have some time for questions at the end. And if you're watching online and you have a question for Lowrie, you could text me if you know my number, and I could ask the question for you there. So, all right, I'm going to turn it over to Lowrie.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, so I'm Lowrie, and this is my wife, Deb. Stand. And we have 4 children. Hannah is our eldest. She is 19. She just graduated with her associate's degree from community college back in Maine. And Liam is our youngest. Stand, Liam. Acknowledge the crowd. Thank you. And he's 14. He's our youngest. Then we have Duncan in the middle here. And he just graduated from high school. And this is Kaylee. If you see her name written down, which let's see, if you want to pull up that first slide, I think you'll see it, you will realize that it is in a different phonetic system, and that's because it's from the Scottish Gaelic, Kaylee. She's 16, so she's going to be a junior this year, and all 4 of them are coming with us to Kenya. And that's the plan, and we are anticipating a great family adventure as well as learning opportunity and challenge. So we are going with a group that is called Straight Up Missions. And you can see in the slide there that town that's spread out there is called Sekenani. And it's a small town near the Masai Mara Game Preserve. And I'll share a little bit more about that in a minute. And let's see, if you could pull up the second slide, then I'll just give you a little refresher of the geography of Kenya. It's there in East Africa, right on the Indian Ocean. And we're going to be over in the western side of Kenya at this town called Sekenani, kind of a couple hours west of Nairobi. It's right on the Tanzanian border. And now a little bit about the Robertsons. Deb and I met in Seoul, South Korea. We were teaching there at a place called the International Christian School. They have a network that's in a number of different countries, but they started their work in Korea, so they have 4 schools there. And Deb and I met there. It's kind of a fun story about how we both got there and met, but I won't take time to tell the whole story. We met there. We were teaching. We came back to the States. We got married in 1998, and then we went back for our first year of marriage and our last year of teaching at those schools in Korea. And then we came back to the States, and I attended Moody Bible Institute. While we were there, we connected with a group called Pioneers. Maybe some of you have heard of them. Their headquarters are over in Orlando. And we felt like God was calling us to join their North Korea team. So we spent some years getting some training and raising our support. And then in 2004, we went back to Korea with Pioneers. We went to Seoul. We were going to study Korean, and we did at Sogang Daehakyo, the college there. And unfortunately, shortly after we arrived, our team began to unravel. So we were only there for 9 months that time, but Deb was pregnant when we left there, and so Duncan was born in Seoul while we were there. And through a series of events, we found ourselves back in the U.S., and I was teaching at a Christian school. We've always felt like we were called to missions. Deb made a commitment to follow God into missions when she was a teenager at Timberley. And that's a camp, is it outside Rockford? Yeah, Wisconsin. And I made a commitment when I was in a Bible Institute, my first year there. So we've always had missions on our mind, but for that period of time, we thought, well, there's a lot of work of disciple making that we can do right here in Maine and New Hampshire. I'm from Maine, Deb is from Rockford, Illinois. So we're doing that, but after a few years, we just felt like God was leading us to go back into missions. So during that stretch, Liam and Kaylee were born. And after 5 years, well, 4 years really, after 4 years at that Christian school, I started seminary online because we felt like, God is leading us to go back into missionary work. And then I finished my degree out in Denver at Denver Seminary. And we explored different missions that were there, some well-known ones, OMF and World Venture have their headquarters there in Colorado, in Denver. But we just didn't feel like God was leading us to do that. So we came back to Maine. I don't know if you know much about New England, but there's a lot of need for ministry right there. When we were going with Pioneers, I think they said if it's less than 2% evangelicals, it kind of qualifies as an unreached people group. Well, actually, New England kind of falls into that territory. So God led us back there for a while, and we were doing some church planting among unchurched people there, and that was a really fruitful time of ministry. I always kind of felt the urge to go back overseas and serve there, but God kind of gave me this, if it wasn't a red light, it was at least yellow. And so after some 7 or 8 years there, we were sitting around at a graduation party in the afternoon, and someone was saying, well, we have this trip that's going to Kenya, and no one signed up for it. And I just felt God was kind of like, okay, green light. So Hannah and Duncan and I signed up for this trip. It was with a church that we're members at, and they're our sending church now. And they've been sending teams regularly for 5 or 6 years. And we went over there, and that was in February of 2020. Kind of significant date in all of our minds now, right? Because the pandemic was just starting to really get rolling, right? And when we were there in Sekanani with the Sawyers, who I'll tell you about in a moment, I just was floored by the opportunities for ministry there. The idea of the fields being white to harvest was just so clear, and really felt like God was saying, okay, you can help here. You can contribute to this ministry. And so we came back, got out of the country just in time before the world closed all its doors. Indeed, hardly a week after I got back from Kenya, my school said, okay, we're going completely remote. But we got back, and then we were seeking God for more confirmation, and we planned a trip in August of 2020 to go back, all 6 of us, and just see, okay, how's this going to work? Is God going to continue to confirm this or not? And we felt like he definitely gave a resounding yes. That was an interesting trip, obviously, right? In the heart of the pandemic, we had to wear a face mask and a face shield the whole trip over there. But the one benefit that we did have was that, on international flights, you usually don't have a lot of room because they're packed. Well, I even actually got to spread out on the way home over 4 or 5 seats because they were only allowed to be half full. So that was the trade-off. Wasn't too comfortable wearing a face mask and shield, but we did get to spread out. All right, if you could just pull up the slide with the Sawyers for a moment. This is the family that will be joining in Sekanani, Kenya, and they've been there for 15 or 16 years. Most of the time in Kenya has been in Sekanani, and God has just used them amazingly to make disciples there and to serve the Maasai people in Sekanani. So they've been there, and they went with a missions group, and they were with that group for some 10 years or so, but they had some kind of issues with some of the ways that group did things. And so eventually, about 5 years ago, they just felt like they had to break off from that group, and so they started Straight Up Missions. And that is, the biggest thing that Straight Up Missions has going on is right there in Sekanani, and they have 4 or 5 other missionaries. So it's a really small missions group, and it has a lot of growing to do as far as, other missionaries. And since we have some experience with missions, we expect God to use us as part of that growth process. When the Sawyers first got to Sekinani, let's see, if you would pull up the slide that says the beginning at the top. So this is a view of the mission station from in town. And you can see a lot of cows there. I'll mention cows a little more when I talk about the Maasai. So back there up on the hillside, that's where the mission station is. And kind of over on the left-hand side of the picture, you can see there's kind of a large roof there. Well, that is the house that the missionaries who were first on this site, that's what they built. And they didn't get to build a lot more than that. In fact, it was kind of a tragedy, because here they had this big house that they were building for themselves that was up on the hillside where everyone could see it, and they didn't do a lot more for the people there. They did start a church. It wasn't really flourishing at the time. And then the Sawyers came in, and they had a different approach to missions and ministry, and it was really just hands-on, being in the life of the people, right? That's always, whether it's here, there, or wherever. When you have this kind of life-on-life ministry and you really connect with what's going on in people's lives and their needs, then you have an opportunity to speak into their souls and their relationship with Jesus, right? So that's what they did, and they have really grown the ministry a lot, or I should say God has grown it through them, right? So they are primarily ministering to the Maasai tribe. Let's see, we got that Maasai slide up there for a moment. So here's a Maasai man, and you can kind of see behind him some little huts there, and that's what they live in traditionally, and many of them still live in them. They're called bomas, and they build these mud and dung huts and sticks and thatch, and they build them in a circle. And so traditionally the Maasai were a nomadic people, and they would go from place to place with their cows wherever the pasture was. And they would build these huts, and they'd make them in a circle. You bring your cows in at night and put a bunch of hedges around it so the animals, of course, don't get them or you. And that was how they lived. And one of the kind of neat things about these huts that they made is when they move on, they just kind of disintegrate back into the soil, right? Made of mud and dung. So in the past, they would move around a lot. They'd cover a lot of territory. Now, the modern world has kind of come in and kind of pinched that lifestyle a bit. They still have their cows, and they still take them out to pasture and goats. And I'm sure some of them, still manage to be more nomadic. But in some ways, they've become kind of reliant on modern economy kind of things. Particularly in this situation, tourism. They're right by the gate of the Masai Mara Game Preserve, and so tourism's a big part of their economy. That was a really bad thing, and you could see just how bad it was when the pandemic hit and the world was shut down, and all of a sudden there's no tourists. It turned out to be an opportunity for the Sawyers to serve even more and in different ways. But it's kind of, it's a difficulty, and the pandemic really showed just how, they weren't self-sustaining the same way they used to be. Used to be they would mostly get their sustenance from their cows, but now that they've kind of gotten away from that, it was a problem, and people were close to starvation. So the modern world has impacted that. The modern world has not impacted some other things in their culture that are pretty harmful, and Deb's going to share about that in a minute, but there's polygamy, there's FGM, there's child bride situations, and that part of their culture is still going, unfortunately, strong. And even though the Kenyan government has outlawed some of those things, it's harder to stop them than just write a law, right? When a people group has had traditions and ways of thinking and ways of identifying themselves and who they are for centuries, it's hard to just say no more of that. So, the church. Obviously, at the heart of the ministry is the church. And that's a picture of the church they have. It's a nice stone structure. And this picture up here on the left That is the overflow. Recently, they've had to have all of the kids who are there boarding at the school watch a live stream in the cafeteria on the TV there because there hasn't been any room for them inside the church. And on the right, you can see that's a picture inside the church. It was, of course, once they started to open up, it was socially distanced for a while, but now it's just bursting at the seams. Just this morning, Travis posted a picture of the church, and none of the kids and teachers were even there. And it was still bursting at the seams. So I know for a couple of years now he's wanted to build a new church building, but there's some other projects that have come in and been more urgent, if not more important. So right now, Travis is the pastor of the church. I'm not sure if that's going to change or not. As in a lot of cultures where polygamy is rampant and is really rooted in the culture, it can be hard to find qualified elders, right? Because you should be the husband of one wife. So, if you come there and a man believes in Jesus and matures, but he's not the husband of one wife, well, then he's not qualified, right? So there are a couple of Kenyan elders there, and they play an important role, and Travis is, pushing out the preaching and things like that to them more and more. But ultimately, the vision will probably be as Messiah mature in Christ like that, rather than have them take over that church, probably would be more strategic to have them go somewhere else and start another one. So whether or not Travis will, be replaced by a Kenyan, which is kind of the best practice, right? The kind of ministry dynamics may make that not the best choice. He is ordained by the Africa Inland Church, which owns the property that the mission station is on. And so there's some, significant working together with this African group. And sometimes that's positive, and sometimes it can be quite frustrating because, there are issues in the Kenyan culture, such as bribery and things like that. And not to say that the church necessarily, the African Inland Church, is involved in bribery exactly, but, there can be difficulties working with them, and maybe sometimes differing priorities. But he's ordained by them, he's connected with them, and so that's a good connection with the indigenous people in the country. Again, most of the people there are Maasai. When he preaches in Swahili, and there's one of the elders translates it into Maasai. Maasai is a very difficult language to learn. It's a tonal language, and most of the people speak Swahili as well, although there's still a number that don't. And English is also one of the official languages of the country. So there's some of that, but you need to have Swahili to get along in the country, and that's what we'll be learning. Hopefully, we'll have a tutor who will come and live with us, and that will enable us to stay there on the mission station while we're learning rather than having to be at a school in Nairobi or something. And that way we'll be able to start ministering fairly soon after we get there. So the ministry is in addition to the church, which is, of course, a huge ministry, and that's a focal point of disciple making there. But there's so many other ways that they do that. So we've got straight up medical clinic, and there it is. And I should say, Travis is a builder by trade, and that has been a huge platform for him to make disciples. There's always something being built. As long as I've been in touch with this ministry, always something being built there. And, that's such a huge thing because people can look over there, just like I was talking before about looking over there and seeing the white folks' big mansion. They can look over there. There's a clinic. That goes up. Oh, housing for the clinic workers. A school, a church, another school. All these things are popping up, and you can see that God is at work. And you can see that there's love from these people to you because it's almost literally concrete, although it's mostly stone, actually. But so the clinic, this is a huge thing. There wasn't much great medical care before they put the clinic up. Travis tells a story of a guy who was a janitor in Nairobi, and then he moved out to Sekanani and put his shingle up as a doctor or some kind of medical worker. So you can just imagine. Someone said to me, well, he knows how to clean wounds, right? Anyway, not the person you want working on you, right? So there's an x-ray machine there. They have anti-venom for snakes. They have, a pharmacy and lots of other things that they can do right there. All the workers in the clinic are qualified Kenyans. So it's just a great, great place. And again, one of the things Travis has built is some apartments for those workers, so they're right there, and they have a good setup for their life to serve well at the clinic. Obviously, these things are all interrelated, right? If somebody has to leave the mission station and go to a poor living situation that's stressful, well, they're not going to be able to work as well at their medical profession when they come back to the station. So, nice, stable housing there is a big deal. And another important ministry is Mara Christian Academy, which is a K through 8 school that the Sawyers started, and it has really grown a lot over the years. They have some students who are local, and they commute, by foot of course, to the school, and then there's others who are boarders at the school. And in Kenya, as everywhere, education is really important, right? Good education, you have lots of opportunity in the future. Bad education, you're going to probably be in a bad way, right? In the Kenyan system, K through 8 is really huge because at the end of 8th grade, they have a test that they take. And that kind of determines the whole trajectory of the rest of their life. Do well on that test, and you can go on to high school, you can go on to college. Do poorly on that test, and you're done. You're probably going to be a life of poverty and menial labor and struggling to get by. So it's a really huge test, and it's kind of a national holiday when the test results come out, and they just read the test results all day, and everyone just sits around and watches. So the past couple of years, Mara Christian Academy has been the top school on that test in their county. So you can just imagine how huge of a thing that is. Everybody's watching, and they see that your school has got the top score in your county. Glory to God, obviously, and opportunity for more ministry. It's, one of the challenges, though, is Travis tries to keep the school to a reasonable population because a lot of schools, kids are just crammed in there. I mean, he compares the conditions to like a prison. But now he's got people from hours away saying, hey, we'd like to send our kid to your school. So that's a tough call for him to make, but he wants to maintain the quality for the kids who are there. So it's a really, really amazing thing. And again, God, gets glory across the country when these scores are read off. And wow, Mara Christian Academy is the top school in their county for several years in a row. And they keep growing and growing. Again, all the teachers are Kenyans. The area is mostly Maasai. That's mostly the Maasai tribe, but they're a mixture of other tribes as well. So they're not all Maasai, but they're all Kenyans. And they're all gone through their teacher college and all that. Another thing that Travis built, and this was a pandemic project, is the snack shack. And his concept, and this kind of illustrates how ministry opportunity, it's like rampant growth, So he first started with just an idea of this would be a fun thing for the kids at the school. It would be a blessing to the kids at the school to have this snack shack. So he puts it up, and then before you know it, people from the game preserve are coming. That's kind of one of the trucks that they drive around the preserve in and give you tours in, and people are coming from town, and it becomes a great place to sit down and have a cup of chai and have a discipleship conversation and just connect with people. Another piece of that is that kids from the town have started to gravitate towards it more as a safe place. You can imagine in a poor town where there's lots of foreign visitors coming with lots of money, that's a bad situation for certain kinds of things, the drugs and prostitution and stuff like that can flourish in the town. It's kind of a traditional thing to make this kind of home brew that can sometimes kill a person. So, there's all kinds of dangers like that in the town center for young people. But now here is this safe, fun place where a kid can come, be away from that, and just be a kid and just hang out and have a discipleship conversation, maybe with some other kids. The Sawyer girls are thoroughly involved in this ministry. They have 4 teenage girls, and they, so, wow, you can go over here and sit down with one of the Sawyer girls, and in addition to just having fun, you're going to hear about Jesus, and that might be something that our kids are involved in too, just hanging out, but being the presence of Jesus among those people. Mara Christian High School. This is a ministry that is beginning. It's going to open in January. That's the beginning of their school year. And we're hoping to be there in October so we can get some Swahili under our belts. And much of my ministry, if not most of it, will be related to the school because I'm an educator. So there you can see in that picture, which is a little bit dated now. They've got the first story in, and the second story has got all the slabs for that poured. And I imagine by now we got a few layers of stone going up for the second story. So the Kenyan government told the Sawyers that they needed to have this secondary school. And so that precipitated the building of it. But they're excited to do it because, they've been there now and they see, children growing up in their school, coming to know Jesus, and then, they got to send them off to these schools that are like prisons, and that's such an issue when, starting to see Jesus get some traction in people's lives, and then you lose contact with them because they have to go off to this terrible situation. It's not uncommon in Kenya for the students to riot and burn the school down. Maybe I should say not unheard of. Maybe it's not quite uncommon, but so you can just see, it's a terrible situation at those schools. And here's this young believer you want to keep pouring into their life, and they have to go away to school, So now when this school is finished and opens, those kids won't have to go away to one of those schools. They'll be able to be right there, learning, continuing the quality education that they've had, and continuing the discipleship opportunities and connections that they've had. And so that's a very exciting thing and something we are excited to be part of. And one of the most crucial ministries that they have is to women and girls. And Deb is going to come and share about Mara Children's Home and the Haven.
All right, good morning. Is this good? Okay. So in my walk with Jesus and time serving him, he always seems to put me in connection with women and kids, just pouring into their lives and teaching them to follow Jesus. And I anticipate something of the same when we're in Sekanani. The picture went away. So Mara Children's Home is something that was started, I don't even know now, several years ago. But they house girls traditionally between 11 and 16, 17 years old. But more recently, they've had girls as young as 3 come into the home. Right now, there are 3 preschoolers, which was something they weren't expected, but something God brought to them, and we're excited to pour into these children. Most girls there's 26 girls at the children's home right now, and most of the girls there have run away from or been pulled out of a child bride situation. The Maasai traditionally practice polygamy, and traditionally give their girls away shortly after their first period, when they're ready to become mothers. And that's a source of income for the family. But what often happens, so child bride is now illegal in Kenya, but is still practiced more out in the bush. And because of polygamy, so you'll have a man who's got 3 or 4 wives. When he dies, there's now 3 or 4 widows, and some of those women are quite young. And that is left up to either an older son or an uncle to take care of those widows and their children, which can be really difficult when you're facing poverty. And so often those girls are then given away really young. And so many of the girls at the children's home have either run away from or been pulled out of that child bride situation, or some situations with FGM, which is a female circumcision. So I wanted to just share a couple of stories of some of the young girls who are in the home. There's a young girl who I believe just graduated from 8th grade, but her mom lives in the village and is a widow. And when her husband died, she kind of saw the writing on the wall that her daughter was likely going to be given away, and reached out to the Sawyers and said, can you take my daughter? Can you take her out of this situation? And so they welcomed her into the children's home. She, as far as the Kenyan government is concerned, she's a ward of the children's home, but her mom and her siblings live right there in the village, so she still gets to see them, but she was protected from that situation, and she started attending the school there, and has just flourished in her relationship with Jesus, and in her education, and she is a leader among the girls there at the home. Sorry, my phone keeps going to sleep. Another young lady who was there at the children's home had heard about Mara Children's Home, but lived in a village quite a ways away, and she had learned that she was going to be given away, and had actually chose to run away from her family and run away from that situation of being given away as a bride, and actually spent the night in the game preserve on her own. So there's lions, there's hyenas, it's a very dangerous place to have spent the night by herself, but ran away, traveled through the preserve, spent the night by herself, and showed up on the mission saying, I need a place. And they welcomed her in and are discipling her and loving on her, providing counseling, providing health care, and education and discipleship into a relationship with Jesus. While we were visiting back in 2020, Lowrie and I had gone into the city that's about an hour away, and Travis and Laura were visiting with one of their teachers who was in the hospital. And hospitals there are quite different than hospitals here, but there was a women's ward, a room maybe half the size of this with a dozen beds or so, with women on the ward with all different types of female issues being taken care of. And while they were visiting this teacher, they noticed a little girl on a bed who was about 3 years old. And at first they thought she was maybe the daughter of one of the women there, but then discovered that she actually was a patient herself, and she had experienced some rather severe abuse. And through a series of conversations, Laura and Travis have a great relationship with the children's worker, which would be like the Department of Health and Human Services kind of caseworker that here in the States would pull somebody into a foster care system. So they've got a really good relationship with this woman who's a caseworker. They reached out to her and said, what's going on with this little girl? What's the story with her? And learned a little bit more about what had happened to her. I just really felt like God was saying, you need to take this little girl. So even though they weren't set up for a 3-year-old, within a couple of days, this little girl was living on the mission, getting the medical care that she needed, getting the love and counseling that she needed from the trauma that she had been through. And 2 years later, she is now going to be entering 1st grade there at the school, and is learning about Jesus, has experienced love and healing. And we all just fell in love with this little girl while we were there. It was great to be a part of the beginning of her story. So another young lady I want to tell you about, she ran away from a child bride situation when she was 11 or 12, and at that point she had been through second grade, and that was the end of what her family situation had allowed for her to experience for school. She ran away from her family when she was going to be given away, came to the children's home, and started going to school at Mara Christian Academy. So imagine you're 11, 12 years old, but still in second grade. So by the time she graduated from 8th grade, which was just this last year, and she scored one of the highest marks at the school, and really high in the county as well. So she'd been at the children's home for a number of years, is now graduating 8th grade, but is almost 18. And the Kenyan government has started certifying children's homes, which is good because that means that they're being held to a standard, children are being cared for better, but that means that at 18, children can no longer be in children's homes. So as Jane is graduating from 8th grade and going off to one of the high schools, when she comes back on break, she can't stay in the children's home. And there's a number of girls who are reaching that age, 16, 17, where they see on the horizon something else is needed. And so the Sawyers are building what's called the Haven, which is going to be sort of like a youth hostel, where the girls then who are coming back from break can come and stay, live on break, whether they're going off to high school, whether they just need some job training, or maybe eventually would choose to get married. But this is a sort of transitional housing for those girls who have sort of aged out of the children's home, but still need that love and care and support. And so I anticipate working a lot with these young women, and then the women in the community who are just learning to love Jesus. Time for a couple more stories? A little bit. Many of the Maasai women didn't have the opportunity for a lot of education, and so a lot of them are illiterate, and they have these solar-powered MP3 players where they can listen to the Bible in Maasai, and will walk around their house, doing their housework, walk around the village, listening to God's word. And there's one woman whose husband is not interested in going to church and says that he is not interested in Jesus. But she has her little MP3 Bible playing wherever she goes, and if she's in the other room, he will often say, "I can't hear that, turn it up." So he's listening in the other room to God's word, and God is having an effect on the lives of these women and in their husbands and their children as well. So, all right, turn back over. I could tell you more stories later.
Yes, sorry to cut you off, my wife, but we got to finish up. So yes, there's a lot more we could tell. Among them, it was really exciting during the pandemic. The church was closed down, but they started live streaming their worship services and doing some devotions online. Because a lot of people, even though they live in a mud and dung hut, they still have a smartphone. So they can get that. And they had a ministry called Kweli, Truly, Truly. It just grew exponentially. When we were there in August, it just kept, like we'd look one day, it was at 8,000 followers, and then a couple of days later it would be 9, and so it grew to above 10. I think it might be at 12 or 13 now. So that was a great ministry, all in Swahili, but any Swahili speaker can connect with that. They got national attention on the radio and TV from the food program that they started to feed all the Maasai who couldn't feed themselves because of the tourism industry being shut down. So there's lots of opportunity there. It's just bursting. Among the things that Travis shared that are some opportunities he wasn't able to take advantage of, there's a local girls' high school in town that asked him to come to teach Bible there, but he couldn't. He's just too busy. So that's the kind of thing that I hope to be doing. Another thing, they have a lot of game camps, they're called. They're really resorts for Westerners. But the way the lifestyle of the workers is, they're there for 3 months, and they basically don't leave. Maybe they can get into town occasionally to get some toiletries or something, but they're pretty much stuck there. And then I think they go home for a month. So one time, some people there asked him to come and do a worship service on the game preserve for the workers. And again, he's busy doing that with the church right there on the mission station. So that's another of the kinds of things that I might be doing, in addition to teaching adult Sunday school and contributing to the worship ministry and the school. And they have something called Boys Club and Girls Club, which is like an after-school discipleship thing for the students at the K-8 school. And that might be something that I'm, teaching, or I might try and push that off on some of my children or something like that. Or, Deb or Kaylee or Hannah might be involved in the Girls Club. So there's just so many opportunities for discipleship and leadership development, and that is what we anticipate being involved in. It's just so exciting to see how white for harvest the fields are there. And we are hoping to leave in October, Lord willing. We have to have 90% of our support. We're at 60% right now, although we have close to 90% of the startup costs that we'll need. So yes, please join us in praying that we'll be able to go in October and get there a few months before the school starts and get some Swahili under our belts so that we can function in all the ways that we need to. And we want to thank you so much for your support thus far and going into the future. It's a blessing to partner with all of you, and we hope to see some of you at some point there in Sekanani with us. We'd love to have some short-term teams come, and when they come, they're just whatever a person can do, there's a need for that. That's what it's like, In the past, our sending church, again, sends a team every year, although I missed a year because of the pandemic, but we have a chiropractor who goes, and she does some carpentry, but she also adjusts some people's back, which, of course, you can imagine if you're sleeping on the floor in a mud hut, that might be welcome, right? So whatever a person can do, there's a need for it. So thank you very much. Please come. We have our table out there. If you have any questions for us, we would love to answer your questions, and we have more things we could tell you, too. So thank you.